In today's world, people are constantly told to be more confident, be stronger, assert yourself. We are surrounded by countless lessons on personal branding, standing out, and making sure we are not left behind in a fiercely competitive society. But have you ever asked yourself, what happens when the ego grows too big? When pride becomes a burden, and the need to prove ourselves turns into loneliness, pressure, and even suffering? There is an unspoken truth. Many of life's tragedies do not come from enemies outside, but from the ego within. If we dare to ask the opposite question, can we be happier if we loosen our grip on the self? Could humility and non-self be the doorway to a deeper, more enduring strength? Then we step into a very different journey, one that the Buddha and great sages of the past have left for humanity. Humility is often misunderstood as weakness and non-self as losing one's identity. In truth, humility is the very strength that allows us to connect, to learn, to grow. And non-self is the path that frees us from the chains of attachment, opening the way to an inner freedom no power, wealth, or fame could ever grant. The real question is, do we dare to believe that this strength already lies hidden within us, waiting to be awakened? In this script, we will explore the foundational Buddhist teaching of non-self, inspiring stories of humility from the Buddha and his great disciples, and most importantly, how these lessons can be directly applied to your relationships, your work, and your inner life. This is not only a journey of philosophy, but also a mirror to reflect upon yourself. In teams, easy to fracture. In families, ego creates conflict between spouses, distance between parents and children. In friendships, ego turns bonds fragile, ready to break over the smallest disagreements. Modern society glorifies the image of the individual hero, those who stand out from the crowd. We hear slogans like, "Be different," and delusions of power. The more society worships the ego, the more people become obsessed with protecting their self-image, rather than opening their hearts to genuine connection. As a result, while the heart is too small, this problem exists not only at the individual level, but also on a global scale. Conflicts, disputes, wars, most stem from collective ego, the ego of nations, religions, factions. When a community elevates its ego above all else, declaring itself absolutely right and others absolutely wrong, violence and hatred inevitably follow, and move toward a society with less hatred and more love. Looking honestly at the harsh realities of our time, we see clearly that humanity cannot continue feeding an infinite ego. The larger the ego grows, the further people drift apart, and the deeper the well of suffering becomes. On the other hand, if each individual learns to lower the ego, to practice humility, and to live with non-self, society will grow lighter, more harmonious, and people will rediscover genuine peace. And it is from this point that our journey begins, the journey of discovering the true value of humility and non-self. A journey not only to understand Buddhist philosophy, but also to find answers to the crises of our time, and above all, to rediscover peace within our own hearts. 1.2. East and West. Two different perspectives on ego and humility. If we look back at the history of human civilization, we can see that the concepts of ego and humility have been shaped, developed, and valued very differently in the East and the West. These differences have given rise to distinct lifestyles, value systems, and even approaches to the pursuit of happiness. And precisely because of this, in today's age of globalization, we have the opportunity to observe and compare, allowing us to understand why Buddhism, with its spirit of non-self, offers a refreshing and harmonizing path for these seemingly opposing traditions. In the West, especially in Greco-Roman civilization, the ego was often linked with the ideal of self-assertion, individuality, and uniqueness. Greek philosophy, from Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, laid the foundation for the belief that a person must know oneself, must clearly define, "Who am I?" in order to live a purposeful and meaningful life. In this cultural context, the ego was not merely a sense of self, but also a foundation for freedom and personal rights. Moving into modern times, especially from the Renaissance and the Industrial Revolution, the West further emphasized the value of the individual. People were encouraged to assert themselves, to be different, to build their own names. Success was measured by how much one could rise above the crowd, surpass competitors, or leave a personal mark in history. The notion of the self-made man became a celebrated ideal, admired as the epitome of strength and independence. This perspective fueled tremendous achievements in science, art, politics, and economics, as it inspired creativity, ambition, and perseverance. Yet, the shadow of this ideal was the over-glorification of the ego. When the individual is placed above all else, competition becomes the natural state of society, and pride, even arrogance, can be seen as necessary for success. In such a context, humility is often misunderstood as weakness, a lack of confidence, or submissiveness. A humble leader may be seen as lacking authority. A person who does not self-promote may be dismissed as insignificant. Thus, many in the West find themselves torn between the desire to maintain humility and the fear of falling behind in the race of self-assertion. In contrast, the East, particularly in cultures deeply influenced by Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, cultivated a very different view. The ego, in the eyes of many Eastern traditions, was not meant to be displayed too prominently. Community-oriented values taught people to prioritize the collective over the individual, to seek harmony, conformity, and balance. In Japan, there is a saying, "The nail that sticks out gets hammered down," implying that those who stand out too much are often suppressed. In traditional Chinese culture, leaving a lasting legacy without needing fame. But the Eastern approach also has its drawbacks. When humility is pushed to the extreme, it can become timidity, fear, or self-denial. A person is no longer trapped in the need to either flaunt or deny the self. They can live freely, unfolding their talents while remaining grounded in humility. Humility in Buddhism does not mean self-effacement or weakness, but the release of the illusion that I am more important than others. Thus, in today's world, where the West struggles with the overinflation of the ego, and the East grapples with the fear of losing its humble traditions, the Buddhist spirit of non-self is more relevant than ever. It does not force us to choose between extremes, but offers a middle way. To affirm oneself without attachment, and to practice humility without self-denial. A humility that did not make them smaller, but instead allowed their light to shine all the brighter. 1.3. Why Buddhism places its focus on non-self, anatta, the doorway to liberation from suffering. When we speak of Buddhism, one of the most central, pervasive, and at the same time difficult concepts for newcomers to grasp is non-self, anatta. Why did the Buddha not choose the self as the foundation of practice? While many other philosophical and religious traditions around the world build their systems on affirming the existence of a self, the answer lies in this. Non-self is not an abstract theory for debate, but a living truth that the Buddha directly experienced in his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. From his early observations of life, the Buddha saw that the root of suffering lies in clinging to the self. When a person believes there is an eternal, unchanging I, they inevitably generate endless desires, fears, and conflicts. For if this I were permanent, it would need to be protected, nourished, asserted, and of course, superior to others. This clinging drives people into cycles of rivalry, jealousy, and suffering. In the Four Noble Truths, the foundation of Buddhist teaching, the first truth is life is suffering, dukkha. And suffering is not only about illness, aging, death, or life's dissatisfactions. It is more profound, the perpetual anxiety of trying to hold on to what cannot be held. The body is always changing, emotions are impermanent, thoughts shift constantly, and honor and status are fragile like dust before the wind. The self, upon close examination, is merely an aggregate of the 5 skandhas: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. But through ignorance, people mistake these aggregates for a real, enduring I. The Buddha realized that to attain liberation, this illusion must be broken. Thus, he placed non-self at the heart of his entire teaching. Non-self does not mean denying the conventional existence of a person, but rather denying the existence of an eternal, unchanging essence within an individual. When we see that the self is only a stream of arising and passing phenomena, we can finally release our clinging. Indeed, many Western traditions emphasize the question, "Who am I?" as a way to seek human essence. But Buddhism goes a step further. The I is not an essence to be found, but an illusion to be overcome. Only by realizing this can we see the impermanent and dependent arising nature of all things. A flower cannot exist on its own. It depends on soil, water, sunlight, and air. Likewise, a person is not an independent entity, but exists only in relation to countless conditions. By placing non-self at its center, the Buddha also highlighted a profoundly important consequence: compassion. For when we no longer see ourselves as separate from others, the boundary between me and you naturally fades. We recognize that another's suffering is also our own suffering. We no longer live just to protect a small self, but to nurture collective well-being. This is the root of great compassion, transcending family, nation, and race. If the self is central, then happiness becomes a zero-sum game. One person's gain is another's loss. But when non-self is central, happiness no longer depends on comparison, but on harmony. In non-self, we do not need to be above anyone else, because happiness comes from letting go, not from grasping. Non-self is also the key to facing death. If we believe in an eternal self, then death is the greatest terror, the complete annihilation of me. But if we see the self as only a flow of dependent origination, then death is merely a transition, like a flame passing from one candle to another. No permanent I is destroyed, nor does any I remain forever. There is only the continuation of causes and conditions. Another reason Buddhism emphasizes non-self is its potential to open the door to equality. If the self is not a true entity, then all distinctions of caste, status, race, or gender are also illusory. It was precisely the spirit of non-self that enabled Buddhism, even in the time of the Buddha, to break the rigid caste system of ancient India, welcoming everyone, from kings to slaves, into the path of practice and liberation. Non-self is not just a philosophical concept. It is a practical method. In every mindful breath, every step of walking meditation, practitioners observe their body and mind arising and ceasing. More importantly, it is to point out the path out of suffering. Non-self is liberating truth. It does not erase us, but opens us. It does not make us weak, but sets us free. It does not take away life's meaning, but gives us a deeper one, to live not just for a small self, but for the peace of all. When we truly understand non-self, if we let go of the self, do we lose ourselves? The haunting question of every seeker. In the journey of exploring humility and selflessness, many people inevitably raise a profound question. If I let go of myself, then who am I? If there is no more me, will I disappear? Will I become invisible, meaningless in this world? This is one of the most natural, even fundamental questions that anyone approaching Buddhist teachings has at least once wondered about. The self, for most of us, is not just a concept. It is tied to our sense of existence, to memories, to joys and sorrows, to everything we believe makes us unique. From childhood, we are taught to affirm the self, protect the self, and build an identity so that we are not swallowed up by the crowd. That is why, when we hear of non-self, or letting go of the ego, erase our presence, or live a dull, anonymous life, what Buddhism emphasizes is the release of the illusion of a permanent self. In other words, we do not lose ourselves. Instead, we discover a nature that is vaster, freer, and beyond all limits. Imagine a drop of water falling into the ocean. If the drop insists, "I am a separate drop," it will always feel small, lonely, and terrified of drying up. But when it lets go of that idea, the drop does not disappear. It merges into the ocean, becoming part of the boundless. Likewise, when a person abandons self-attachment, they do not vanish. They discover unity with the great flow of life. In truth, if we look deeply, we see that the self we cling to has never been fixed. A 3-year-old child, an 18-year-old youth, a 40-year-old adult, and an 80-year-old elder may carry the same name, the same identity card, but are they truly the same unchanging me? The body changes. Thoughts change, emotions change, even preferences and worldviews change. This self we imagine to be solid turns out to be nothing but an ever-flowing stream. Therefore, we can smile and realize that precisely because of non-self, we are able to change, to grow, and to be liberated. If the self were permanent, then all efforts in practice and spiritual transformation would be meaningless. The question, if I let go of the self, do I lose myself, thus does not lead us into nothingness but into a new horizon. We do not lose ourselves. On the contrary, we discover the vast essence that has always been there, beyond the narrow confines of self-attachment. Instead of being a small, frightened I, we become an open presence, connected with all, loving all, and free from the endless fear of self-protection. Put simply, when we let go of the self, we do not lose ourselves. We find our true self. Part 2. The concept of non-self in Buddhism. Before diving into specific stories, we need to clarify one core concept, non-self. Only by understanding it properly can we see why the Buddha placed this teaching at the heart of the Dharma, and why for over 2,500 years countless practitioners have found liberation through it. In this part, we will not only examine non-self from a Buddhist perspective, but also compare it with modern philosophy and psychology, fields that may seem distant from religion, yet reveal surprising points of convergence. 2.1. What is non-self? A dialogue between Buddhist wisdom and modern thought. In daily life, the concept of I feels so obvious that we rarely question it. When we say, I am happy, I am suffering, or who am I, we assume there is a central entity, this self, standing behind all these experiences. Yet Buddhism challenges this assumption at its very root. The self you believe in does not truly exist as you think it does. This is the essence of anatta, non-self, one of the three fundamental marks of existence, along with anicca, impermanence, and dukkha, suffering. So what does non-self mean? According to the Buddha, everything we call I, the body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness, are just aggregates, the five skandhas. These aggregates are constantly changing, without any permanent essence. To cling to them as a solid I is to hold on to an illusion. Non-self does not mean nothing exists or nihilism. It means that there is no eternal, unchanging, independent self apart from the conditions that give rise to experience. This may sound abstract, but when compared with philosophy and psychology, the teaching of non-self becomes much more familiar than we might expect. In Western philosophy, since Descartes' famous statement, I think, therefore I am, the self was long treated as the foundation of knowledge. Descartes believed in a thinking subject standing behind all experience, a truth beyond doubt. But later philosophers increasingly questioned this assumption. David Hume, for example, wrote that when he looked inward, all he ever found was a bundle of perceptions, a continuous stream of impressions and ideas, never a solid self. This insight resonates closely with Buddhism's teaching of non-self. By the 20th century, existentialist and postmodern thinkers went further, arguing that the self is not an essence but a construct, shaped by choices, language, society, and history. In other words, the I is not a fixed entity but an ongoing process. Psychology paints an equally fascinating picture. Freud described the ego as merely the tip of the iceberg, with most of the mind hidden in the unconscious, undermining the idea of an independent, all-controlling self. Jung added that the ego is only one archetype among many, with human life shaped by deeper collective patterns. In cognitive psychology and neuroscience, studies show that the sense of self is not a permanent soul, but a product constructed by the brain. Non-self in Buddhism is not a mere theory, but a transformative way of living. The Buddha taught that when one sees non-self clearly, greed, hatred, and delusion begin to fall away. For if there is no fixed I to defend, what need is there for greed? If there is no I to be insulted, what need is there for anger? If there is no I to be bound, what need is there for ignorance? For fear of losing it soon follows. Even in moments of joy, there is an undercurrent of fragility, because we know, consciously or unconsciously, that it cannot last. This insight is not meant to breed pessimism, but rather to awaken us from illusion, helping us see why the search for lasting happiness in external conditions will always fall short. Non-self, anatta, is perhaps the most radical and challenging of the three marks. While impermanence and suffering are concepts we can observe fairly easily, non-self cuts directly against the deepest assumption we hold, that there is a solid, permanent I at the center of experience. The Buddha taught that what we call the self is actually a collection of processes, body, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness that arise and pass away moment by moment. None of these elements are me or mine in a lasting sense. The idea of a fixed, independent self is an illusion that generates craving, fear, and conflict. What makes these three insights powerful is not their philosophical elegance, but their practical application. When we truly understand impermanence, we begin to cherish each moment without clinging. Studies of the brain reveal that our sense of self is not a fixed entity, but a constantly shifting narrative constructed by memory and perception. Therapies like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy are grounded in observing impermanence of thoughts and emotions, showing that we do not have to identify with every mental state that arises. In philosophy, thinkers from the West, such as David Hume, also question the solidity of the self, suggesting it was merely a bundle of perceptions. For practitioners, however, these teachings are not abstract theories, but direct experiences. A meditator sitting quietly can observe impermanence in the breath, in sensations, in thoughts that arise and vanish. Always comparing with others, and always feeling inadequate, they know that talents, achievements, appearances, and thoughts are all impermanent, conditioned, and never independent or eternal. The key difference lies in whether one feels liberated or imprisoned. Selflessness opens the door to freedom, while self-loathing leads only to suffering. A selfless person is not concerned with being better or worse than anyone else, because they are no longer trapped in society's measuring stick. A self-loathing person, by contrast, is haunted by the thought that they are never good enough, never worthy, and this haunting becomes their chain. In modern society, people often confuse humility or selflessness with self-loathing. A bright student who rejects praise, not because they understand selflessness, but because they fear comparison or pressure, that is self-loathing. An employee who never dares to voice opinions, not out of wisdom, but out of fear of being judged, that too is self-loathing. This confusion is dangerous, especially in a world driven by competition. If we mistake selflessness for self-loathing, we may become passive, easily suppressed, and lose our inner potential. Buddhism never teaches us to deny our own value. On the contrary, the Buddha urged people to see themselves truthfully, to recognize strengths, acknowledge weaknesses, and cultivate growth. Selflessness means perceiving ourselves transparently, without exaggeration, without distortion, without attachment. Consider the Buddha after his enlightenment. He did not live in inferiority, nor did he deny his abilities. Instead, he walked confidently across the land, teaching the Dharma and liberating beings, yet without clinging to I or pride. If the Buddha had been self-loathing, he would never have spoken, never dared to share the truth. But because he was selfless, he embodied the strongest, purest confidence, the kind that rests not on ego, but on reality. Thus, practicing selflessness does not make us weak, it makes us unshakably strong. A selfless person is unmoved by praise or blame, by success or failure, and is never chained by shame. They can give wholeheartedly, strive fully, and achieve greatly, yet without turning those things into ego or pride. The subtle point is this: selflessness does not deny the self, but frees the self from illusion. Self-loathing does the opposite. It denies the self in a negative way, robbing us of inner strength. The selfless person acts, creates, and contributes freely. The self-loathing person hesitates, fears, and hides, even when capable. Think of it this way. Selflessness is like the open sky, where clouds come and go without changing the sky's vastness. Self-loathing is like a sealed dark room, where no light can enter. Selflessness opens, self-loathing closes. This leads to a practical lesson. We must be cautious in practicing humility or selflessness, lest we disguise self-loathing as wisdom. True humility comes from deep confidence that we need not prove ourselves, need not compare. Do you do it because you understand that everything is impermanent, that the achievement is not truly yours? Or do you do it because you feel unworthy, because shame controls you? Your answer will show whether you walk the path of selflessness or fall into the pit of self-loathing. The line between selflessness and self-loathing is delicate, and without mindfulness, it is easy to confuse the two. But once we see clearly, we realize that selflessness never weakens us. It strengthens us, frees us, and allows us to live unbound by ego or shame. This is the beginning of a life of lightness, peace, and wholeness in every moment. 2.4. Non-self and mental therapy. Why letting go helps us suffer less. In modern life, people are increasingly confronted with invisible pressures. Stress, anxiety, tension, depression, all of these creep silently into our daily existence. People turn to countless methods for relief: exercise, meditation, travel, psychological counseling. Yet there is a key the Buddha offered more than 2,000 years ago that remains just as powerful today: non-self. Understanding and practicing non-self is not only a philosophical stance, but also a mental therapy that helps us suffer less, reduce attachment, and find peace. First, let us look directly at the root of stress. When we feel pressured, it is often because the ego is being threatened. We fear losing our reputation, fear failure at work, fear the judgment of others. When we realize that what we call I is only a collection of the 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, constantly changing, we no longer cling to any fixed image of ourselves. We see that today's success or tomorrow's failure does not define us completely. We can enjoy the joy of the present moment without turning it into a burden to protect. Likewise, when facing failure, we can see it as an experience that comes and goes. We see that these labels are impermanent. We do not need to hold up a beautiful ego in the eyes of others. We only need to live truthfully and fully in each moment. And paradoxically, this makes us more peaceful and lovable in the eyes of others. Recent scientific studies also show that practicing meditation on non-self reduces activity in the brain's default mode network. It was precisely this humility that allowed his teachings to spread across the world, for he did not build walls of ego, but opened a path that anyone could walk. In modern life, the humble do not live for judgment. They live for truth and goodness. This creates a state of lightness, a freedom of spirit, unbound by endless comparison. Crucially, humility does not hinder personal growth. Many fear that if they are too humble, they will be overshadowed or never advance. But in reality, humility teaches us to apologize when wrong and to express gratitude when helped. These two actions may seem simple, yet they are often the hardest for those consumed by ego. A sincere apology can dissolve conflict, while heartfelt gratitude deepens connection. The humble do not fear admitting flaws, because they know perfection is impossible. Paradoxically, this honesty makes them more respected. Humility is also the root of patience. The humble know that success does not come overnight, and truth never belongs to just one person. They patiently listen, patiently practice, patiently wait for the right conditions to ripen. Such patience becomes the foundation of wisdom and lasting accomplishment. It is important to note, humility is not the same as self-deprecation. The self-deprecating person undervalues themselves, while the humble person recognizes their true worth without needing to boast. The self-deprecating live in inferiority and avoidance, while the humble live with quiet confidence, unclouded by ego. This subtle distinction is essential. Humility does not weaken us. It strengthens us. In the ceaseless flow of life, the humble are like rivers. Rivers always run low, yet it is by flowing low that they gather rich silt, nourish the earth, and sustain countless beings. The arrogant may resemble mountains, lofty and proud, but fixed in place, often barren and alone. True strength lies not in display, but in the ability to nurture, to connect, and to bring benefit to life. Thus, humility is not weakness, but the sign of an inner strength untouched by ego. The humble do not need to prove themselves greater than others. Humility has always been upheld as a foundational virtue of the noble person. In Confucian thought, Confucius once taught, "To know what you know and to admit what you do not know, that is true knowledge." This seemingly simple statement reflects the essence of humility, the honest acknowledgement of one's own limits. In Chinese culture, the image of the gentleman is often tied to calmness, modesty in words, and avoidance of boasting, for true wisdom is revealed in restraint. Taoism, meanwhile, sees humility through the symbol of water. Water is soft, always flowing downward, never contending with anything, yet it nourishes all life. In the Tao Te Ching, Laozi wrote, "The highest goodness is like water. Water benefits all things and does not contend. The lower water flows, the more it contains. And precisely in its yielding lies its enduring strength, overcoming even the hardest rock." This becomes a beautiful metaphor for the power of humility. In Buddhism, humility is more than social etiquette. It is the key that unlocks enlightenment. For pride and arrogance are the roots of ignorance, the veil that blinds awakening. The Buddha emphasized that he did not come to be worshipped as a deity, but merely to show the way. This absolute humility radiated his boundless wisdom and allowed his teachings to spread across the world. In practice, bowing, placing hands together in reverence, or listening without judgment are all gestures that cultivate humility, quiet the ego, and open the heart. In the West, particularly within Christianity, humility has also been seen as one of the highest virtues. St. Augustine once said, "If you ask me what is the essential thing in religion, I will answer, first, humility, second, humility, and third, humility." In the Bible, Jesus repeatedly taught, "Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." Here, humility is not self-degradation but a renunciation of arrogance, allowing the heart to become pure and closer to God. In medieval and early modern Europe, humility was also considered a noble quality of the knight. A true knight was not only courageous and strong but also modest, avoiding boastfulness, never wielding power to oppress the weak. Honor and humility often went hand in hand, for strength without humility quickly became arrogance, and arrogance, in the end, leads to downfall. In modern times, the West continues to affirm the role of humility, but in the language of psychology and social science. Research shows that humble individuals enjoy better mental health, lower stress, and stronger. This echoes the wisdom of the East from millennia ago. The more humble, the more open, the more capable of transformation. Yet, there are intriguing differences. In Eastern cultures, humility is often linked to social harmony and community balance. A humble person is one who yields, who avoids placing themselves above others, thus preserving peace in the group. In Western thought, humility is often emphasized in the individual dimension, as a way of personal growth, a safeguard against arrogance, and even a mark of true leadership. Two approaches, yet both converge on the same truth. Humility is the foundation of wisdom, maturity, and happiness. Another deep convergence lies in the connection between humility and freedom. Both East and West see pride as a form of bondage to the ego. Humility, by contrast, liberates us from pointless comparisons and rivalries. Humility does not mean weakness. It is the strength to step out of the endless cycle of winning and losing. In ancient Greek philosophy, Socrates declared, "The only thing I know is that I know nothing." That acknowledgement, intellectual humility, made him one of humanity's greatest philosophers. If the East uses the image of water to describe humility, the West has a proverb: "The fuller the ear of rice, the lower it bends." When rice is young, it stands tall. When ripe and heavy, it bows naturally. This is a universal image. Education and ignorance, high and low social status. People often see one another through lenses of judgment or raise barriers of arrogance to protect themselves. And within those distances, loneliness, coldness, and indifference arise. Yet there is one quiet but powerful quality that can break down these walls: humility. Humility acts like a bridge that connects people, helping us step across boundaries that once seemed insurmountable. It is not merely an attitude of politeness, but an inner strength that makes others feel respected and understood, and in turn, genuine connection takes root. Humility, in this sense, is not empty modesty, but the glue that bonds people together. In the workplace, humility plays an even more crucial role. An arrogant leader who only issues commands and asserts authority will eventually create an invisible distance with their team. On the other hand, a leader who listens, admits mistakes, and stands on equal ground with subordinates immediately fosters closeness. People become willing to share ideas, give honest feedback, and together build collective strength. Here, humility becomes the bridge that dissolves rigid hierarchies and melts the wall of power. Within families, humility is equally essential to preserving harmony. Many conflicts stem from each side stubbornly clinging to their own ego, each insisting they are right. Yet a single apology, a small gesture of concession, can be the key to saving a relationship. When parents humbly listen to their children, and children humbly try to understand their parents, the generational gap loses its walls. When spouses practice humility, love becomes less fragile under the weight of pride and the hunger to win. On a broader social scale, humility becomes the foundation for breaking down prejudice and discrimination. The wealthy, if humble, do not despise the poor. The educated, if humble, do not belittle those with less schooling. Those in high positions, if humble, do not look down upon those below them. These illusions estrange us from our own fellow human beings. Humility helps dissolve this fog, allowing us to see that all people share the same fears, the same yearning for happiness. The Buddha taught that all suffering stems from clinging to the self. Humility is the first step toward loosening that grasp. It not only liberates us from the suffocation of pride, but also paves the way for harmony within the community. In the West, a nod of acknowledgement when someone is right, a heartfelt thank you, a timely apology, or a willingness to listen without judgment. These seemingly simple acts become the hammer that gradually chips away at the walls dividing human hearts. One might say humility is a bridge. If one person begins laying the first stones, the other side will often build toward them in return. When we live with humility, we create a safe space where others can also lower their defenses. And just like that, two distant souls may finally meet. In a fractured, polarized society, humility is no longer just a personal virtue. It is a mission. It asks each of us, do we want to build more walls or more bridges? The answer shapes the world we live in and determines whether humanity can truly draw closer together. 3.4. When science confirms. People tended to regard humility as a spiritual or ethical quality rather than something that could be studied or measured scientifically. Yet in recent decades, psychologists and neuroscientists have begun asking, can humility actually be understood, analyzed, and validated through science? The deeper they explore, the more they discover that humility is not only a moral value, but also a vital factor connected to wisdom, mental health, and adaptability in the modern world. Social psychologists define humility not simply as self-denial or lowering oneself, but as having an accurate and balanced awareness of oneself, recognizing strengths, acknowledging weaknesses, being open to feedback, and respecting others. It is a state of balance, different from either arrogance or self-deprecation. If arrogance exaggerates the self and self-pity diminishes it, humility stands as the middle way, realistic and awake. Several psychological studies conducted in the United States and Europe show that people who are rated as humble tend to have higher emotional intelligence, better self-regulation, and stronger, more lasting relationships. They are less likely to suffer from chronic stress, because they do not constantly feel the need to prove themselves. Instead, they recognize their limits. A study published in the Journal of Positive Psychology found a direct link between humility and practical wisdom. Humble individuals are more likely to make sound decisions in complex situations because they are less attached to their egos. Instead of clinging to their personal viewpoint, they are willing to listen to multiple perspectives and from there choose the most appropriate solution. In this sense, humility makes thinking more flexible. Modern psychology shows that humble people are more motivated to pursue lifelong learning, since they do not assume they already know everything. They are more open to new ideas and unafraid of challenges. In contrast, Those who are overly self-satisfied often stagnate, believing they need no further guidance. Thus, studies using fMRI scans reveal that experiences of humility activate brain regions associated with empathy and social cognition. When people display humility, the brain lights up in areas that help them understand the emotions of others, thereby increasing social connection. This suggests that humility is not just a moral choice, but also a biological process observable in the brain. Importantly, scientists today distinguish between false humility and genuine humility. False humility is often just a disguise for arrogance, where a person outwardly appears modest, but inwardly remains judgmental and prideful. Genuine humility, on the other hand, arises from deep self-awareness, the recognition of personal limitations, and an openness to others' value. Only with genuine humility can true wisdom take root and flourish. Science also shows that humility plays a significant role in personal happiness. A study at Baylor University in the United States revealed that humble people tend to have more stable family lives, fewer conflicts, and higher life satisfaction. Because they are less trapped in an inflated sense of self, they are better at accepting differences and forgiving others. This fosters long-lasting relationships and greater inner peace. In Eastern philosophy, especially Buddhism, humility has always been regarded as the foundation of wisdom. The Buddha taught that clinging to the self is the root of ignorance, and only by loosening the ego can one truly approach liberating wisdom. Interestingly, modern psychology and neuroscience are arriving at similar conclusions. The bigger the ego, the more distorted the perception. The smaller the ego, the closer one gets to truth. In this way, the convergence of ancient spiritual insight and modern science provides powerful evidence. Humility does not make us weaker, but stronger and wiser. As one scientist eloquently put it, a large ego is like a warped lens. It distorts the image of reality. Only humility restores the lens to clarity, allowing us to see the world as it truly is. Looking at today's society, it becomes clear that the lack of humility contributes significantly to mental crises and social conflicts. Conversely, by cultivating humility, each person learns to live with balance and wisdom, and from there a more harmonious society can take shape. And this is no longer just a moral teaching. It is a truth confirmed by science. Part 4. Stories of the Buddha's humility. Throughout the history of Buddhism, there are stories that seem small, yet carry a light strong enough to move hearts across generations. They are moments when the Buddha encountered people despised by society, those at the very bottom, living lives everyone else avoided. Yet instead of turning away, he opened his arms, restoring their dignity and faith. Such stories do more than show compassion. They reveal the deep truth of humility, when the enlightened one chose to stoop down in order to lift someone up. For point 1. From a scavenger to a saint, the story of Sunita. During the time when the Buddha was still walking on earth, in the ancient city of Rajagaha, Rajgir, India, there lived a young man named Sunita. He had resigned himself to fate, like a fallen leaf sinking into mud, unable to lift his gaze toward the sky. One morning, as Sunita carried his buckets along the main road of the city, everyone around bowed in reverence. The procession drew closer, and Sunita panicked. According to the customs of the time, untouchables were expected to quickly move aside when noble ones passed. Terrified, Sunita dragged his buckets to the roadside, his heart pounding, sweat dripping down his brow. I am filthy. I must not defile the eyes of the Buddha. Let him pass quickly, he thought. But then something utterly unexpected happened. The Buddha stopped right before him. He did not avoid Sunita, nor did he look down on him. Instead, his gaze was filled with compassion, as though he saw not an untouchable, but a human being in suffering. The Buddha gently asked, "My son, do you wish to be free from this burden? Do you wish to walk the path of liberation?" Sunita attained arhatship, the state of complete liberation. From a man shunned as untouchable, he rose to become a saint, revered by all. When news spread, those who once mocked him now bowed in respect. They asked in disbelief, "How can a waste carrier become a saint?" The answer was clear. It was the Buddha's compassion and humility that had opened the gate for him to step into freedom. The story of Sunita is not only a testimony to the truth that all beings have the potential for awakening, but also a lesson in the power of humility. The Buddha, the enlightened one, could easily have ignored Sunita as others did, but he chose to stop, to see the hidden worth in a man society had buried under prejudice. That act shattered the barriers of caste, dissolving the illusion of noble and low-born, affirming an eternal truth. In the eyes of wisdom and compassion, no one is beneath redemption. Every being can rise, if shown the light. Even today, reading this story, we may find ourselves in Sunita. Perhaps we are not scavengers on the street, yet each of us carries hidden burdens, shame, or feelings of unworthiness. And the Buddha's question from long ago still echoes for us all. Do you wish to be free from this burden? For point 2, the encounter between the Buddha and Angulimala, humility before bloodstained hands. In the history of Buddhism, perhaps no story is as chilling yet heart-opening as the encounter between the Buddha and Angulimala, a notorious murderer who spread terror throughout the land of Kosala. This story is not only a lesson in compassion, but also a powerful testament to the strength of humility. For in the very moment when one might expect fear or force to respond to evil, the Buddha chose to bow with serene equanimity, opening the path to an unexpected transformation. Angulimala, whose real name was Ahimsaka, was born into a Brahmin family of scholars. From an early age, he stood out for his intelligence, quick learning, and the fondness he received from his teacher. Yet, that very favoritism sparked envy among his fellow students. They plotted to slander him, poisoning the teacher's trust. One day, suspicion in the teacher's heart grew so poisonous that he ordered Ahimsaka to perform a dreadful act, an order that pushed the young man onto a path of darkness. The teacher commanded Ahimsaka to kill 1,000 people and collect their fingers as proof of his loyalty. Horrified yet trapped by blind obedience, Ahimsaka saw no escape. This warped demand became the chain that dragged him deeper into sin. The more he killed, the colder his heart grew, his eyes turning hollow. The villagers trembled and gave him a new name. He chased, but no matter how fast he ran, he could not close the distance. The Buddha walked slowly, yet Angulimala could not catch him. Breathless and furious, the bandit roared, "Monk, stop there." The Buddha turned, his gaze gentle, and spoke words that stunned Angulimala. "I have already stopped long ago, Angulimala. It is you who have not stopped." The words struck him like thunder in his soul. Never had anything pierced his heart so deeply. "What do you mean? You are still walking. How can you say you have stopped? I stand still, and yet you say I have not stopped?" Angulimala demanded. The Buddha replied calmly, "I have stopped because I no longer harm any living being. I have stopped walking the path of violence. But you, even if your feet are still, your mind runs endlessly on the road of killing. You have not stopped." The murderer's entire bloody past rushed back to him. The terrified eyes, the dying screams. For the first time, he saw himself as one who had never rested, forever fleeing his conscience. Before the Buddha, unarmed and unafraid, Angulimala felt his world collapse. He fell to his knees, trembling hands raised. "Blessed One, I have committed countless crimes. Please, give me a chance to stop." The Buddha placed a hand gently on his head and said with compassion, "You have understood. That is the beginning of stopping. If your heart is sincere, follow me. Let the garland of fingers fall to the ground, and in its place, take up the garland of mindfulness and precepts." From that day, Angulimala joined the Sangha as a monk. When the people heard, they were outraged. They could not accept that a mass murderer could don the saffron robes. Yet the Buddha did not argue. He met their protests with humility, letting time prove the truth. Indeed, Angulimala practiced diligently, living austerely, repenting day and night. When villagers hurled stones at him, he did not retaliate, but bowed his head and endured, blood staining his robe while his mind remained calm. Once, gravely wounded, he said to the Buddha, "Blessed One, this is truly the fruit of my past deeds. Now that you have stopped, though fruits still ripen, they are lighter beyond measure." Later, Angulimala attained the state of an arahant, living proof that no matter how heavy the sins, for if even a murderer wearing a garland of fingers could become a saint, then it is never too late for anyone to turn back. Yet the most remarkable part of this story is the Buddha's own attitude. He did not confront Angulimala with the pride of enlightenment, nor did he wield power to subdue him. He approached with humility, a slow step, a gentle word, yet enough to halt a bloodstained hand. It was humility that opened the door violence never could. And so, across the centuries, the story reminds us, humility is not weakness. Humility is the quiet strength that can melt even the coldest heart, transform darkness into light, and turn a sinner into one who is liberated. 4.3. The bowl of rice from Sujata, when the Buddha bowed to a sincere heart. In the journey of Prince Siddhartha, the man who would later become the Buddha, there was a seemingly simple moment that became, but still had not reached the ultimate truth. His burning desire for truth led him to try the harshest forms of asceticism. Together with 5 other ascetics, he practiced severe self-mortification in the forest, starving himself, holding back breath, pushing the body to its limits, to see if by crushing the body, one could break free from bondage and attain enlightenment. His body became just skin and bones. Every breath seemed to be his last, and his eyes sank deep with suffering. People in the nearby villages, when they saw Siddhartha, thought of him as a madman destroying himself. Yet he endured, convinced that pain could be the gateway to truth. One day, exhausted beyond limit, he realized his body could not endure any longer. All his senses were failing. In that moment, he awoke to a truth. Extreme asceticism could not lead to liberation. It was just another extreme, opposite to the life of luxury he had left behind in the palace. Neither was the middle way he sought. Sitting beneath a tree, he breathed a long sigh, resolving to abandon this path of self-destruction. Yet his body was so weakened that death seemed close. Without some support, his quest might have ended there. That very day, Sujata, a young girl from a small village near the Naranjana River, was preparing for a simple offering. She was the daughter of a humble farming family. Her parents were not wealthy, but they raised her to be kind-hearted and respectful. Sujata grew up among rice fields, familiar with the sun and wind, with the toils of rural life. That morning, she cooked a bowl of milk rice with pure devotion. Her wish was simple, to make an offering to the spirits, praying for blessings for her family and herself. Carrying the steaming bowl, she walked toward the riverbank, silently praying. From afar, she saw a frail figure sitting beneath a tree, emaciated, weak, on the verge of collapse. Yet despite the body's fragility, there was a light of strength in his eyes unlike anything she had ever seen. At once, Sujata felt a deep urge. This was the one to whom her offering must be given. Holding the bowl with both hands, she approached, bowed, and said gently, "Venerable one, please accept this simple rice. I have nothing precious, only my sincerity. May you accept it." At that moment, Siddhartha, the former prince who had once tasted every luxury, looked upon the young girl. He did not see lowliness, nor class or caste. What he recognized was pure sincerity. Each grain seemed to carry new clarity into his being. News spread quickly. A village girl had fed Siddhartha. The 5 ascetics who had practiced with him were furious. They believed Siddhartha had betrayed the path of renunciation by accepting food from a woman. They abandoned him and went away in anger. Yet in that solitude, Siddhartha found his true strength. It was simply a bowl of rice given in faith. But for the world, it was the meal that nourished the future Buddha, opening the way to an age of awakening. Later, when the Buddha was enlightened, he often recalled Sujata as a precious benefactor, not because her food was fine or rare, but because her heart was pure. For him, true greatness was not in receiving from kings and nobles, but in bowing to the sincerity of the simplest person. The lesson of Sujata's bowl of rice remains powerful today. In a world where people are often judged by wealth, status, or appearance, the Buddha's humility reminds us, what matters is not material value, but the heart. The Buddha's greatness lay in his ability to bow, to accept a poor girl's gift as equal to the finest treasure. That moment radiates as a light for all time, showing that true greatness is not standing above others, but stooping low enough to embrace everyone equally. And from that small bowl of rice, a seed of humility was planted, later blossoming under the Bodhi tree. where Siddhartha attained full enlightenment and brought the light of compassion and wisdom to the world. 4.4. The story. An attitude of equality in all relationships. Among the countless stories about the Buddha, there is one theme that consistently shines through: his unwavering attitude of equality in every relationship. Whether he was addressing a king, a merchant, a monk, or a servant, the Buddha never placed himself above or beneath anyone. To him, each being was equal in value, equal in dignity, and equally capable of walking the path toward liberation. This perspective was truly radical in a society where caste, wealth, and power rigidly defined human worth. In ancient India, one's social position was considered unshakable, and people from lower castes were often treated as invisible, unworthy even of eye contact. There is a story of King Pasenadi of Kosala, a powerful monarch with vast lands and influence. Whenever he came to visit the Buddha, he bowed in deep respect, setting aside all the pride and protocol of royalty. To many, this was shocking. How could a king bow before a wandering monk who owned nothing but a robe and a bowl? But for Pasenadi, it was no shame, because the Buddha never treated him as the king, but simply as a man seeking the path. And in return, Pasenadi found in the Buddha not a subject, not a rival, not a flatterer, but a friend, a teacher, and a mirror. In another account, the Buddha once welcomed a group of untouchables, those considered the lowest of the low, into his monastery. Many came from backgrounds where they either enjoyed privilege or suffered discrimination. In the Sangha, both sat together, ate together, and practiced together, something unheard of in the outside world. Kings and peasants, merchants and beggars, men and women, all wore the same robe, walked barefoot on the same soil. And in a world still struggling with divisions of class, race, and power, his example remains a timeless guide. Treat each person as a human being, neither above nor below you. For in that simple act lies the seed of harmony, compassion, and peace. Part 5. The humility of the disciples. In the history of Buddhism, alongside the radiance of the Buddha, Ananda served as the Buddha's loyal attendant. Every step, every cup of water, every seat prepared for meditation, his care was there. Some underestimated him. He's only the Buddha's attendant, nothing more worth mentioning. But the truth was completely different. In that seemingly small role, Ananda achieved what no one else could. He was the ears and the memory of the Sangha. Nearly all of the Buddha's discourses, later compiled into the sacred texts, were preserved thanks to Ananda's extraordinary memory. Simply by listening, remembering, and repeating, he safeguarded an invaluable treasury of wisdom for humanity, without omitting a single detail. Without Ananda, perhaps today we would only know the Buddha through fragmented stories rather than a complete system of teachings. What makes Ananda's humility even more moving is this. Throughout his years by the Buddha's side, he never used his status as the Buddha's cousin to demand any privilege. He always considered himself a disciple, an attendant, and the one who stood behind. Even when praised by many as the one closest to the Buddha, Ananda never claimed any merit for himself. He only smiled gently, seeing it as responsibility rather than personal honor. After the Buddha's passing, when the senior monks gathered to recite and compile the teachings, many were anxious. Without Ananda, how can we recall the Buddha's words? Then Ananda stepped forward, his eyes still red with grief, and began to recite the teachings word for word, exactly as they had been spoken. The entire assembly was deeply moved. Yet even at that moment of recognition, Ananda felt no pride. He bowed his head and dedicated everything to the Buddha, saying, "I am only the one who repeats. The light belongs to the Blessed One." Ananda's story is not only proof of extraordinary memory, but, more profoundly, a testament to true humility. True humility is not self-deprecation. It is the ability to set aside one's ego in service of the greater good. Ananda chose to stand behind, but for that very reason. His legacy surpasses all personal glory. In Western culture, we often highlight heroes standing on stage. But if we look closely at history, it is often the silent figures behind the scenes who form the foundation that keeps everything from collapsing. Ananda represents this archetype. In a world obsessed with visibility, competition, and recognition, Sometimes what we need most is humility. Doing small things with great love. Standing behind, yet carrying the strength that upholds an entire great work. And when we no longer seek recognition, what we leave behind becomes truly timeless. Ananda never called himself a hero. Yet history has shown that it is precisely such people who are the truest heroes. Heroes who claim no credit, who seek no glory. The name that immediately comes to mind is Sariputta, the one hailed as foremost in wisdom among the great assembly. Yet what made his image truly majestic was not only his rare brilliance, whose name in Sanskrit means son of Sari, was born into a noble Brahmin family in the city of Rajaga. From early childhood, he displayed exceptional intelligence, whatever he studied. He understood thoroughly, and his sharp reasoning amazed even the greatest teachers of his time. Alongside his close friend Mahakassapa, the two soon became celebrated young philosophers, revered by many. In the Indian society of antiquity, where the Brahmin class held supreme status, Sariputta seemed to possess everything: intellect, fame, and prestige. Yet he was not content. What set him apart was his thirst for truth. Even though he had already reached the pinnacle of worldly knowledge, he still felt an emptiness, an aching sense that the philosophies he had mastered could not answer life's most urgent questions about suffering and meaning. It was this humble, relentless seeking that led him to encounter the Buddha. Hearing just a few words on the principle of dependent origination from a monk, one of the Buddha's disciples, Sariputta felt as though a parched traveler had at last found a spring in the desert. He instantly recognized this was the true path, one that transcended argument and abstract philosophy. After taking refuge and becoming one of the Buddha's great disciples, Sariputta quickly revealed his extraordinary wisdom. Many times, the Buddha himself praised him before the assembly, declaring him the disciple of unsurpassed wisdom, one capable of explaining the Dharma with unmatched clarity and depth. Yet even when praised, Sariputta never displayed pride. He never used his sharp mind to distance himself from others. It is said that whenever Sariputta taught the Dharma, his voice was calm and soothing, his eyes full of compassion. He did not wield wisdom like a sword, but carried it like a lamp, lighting the way. To novices who struggled, he patiently instructed without the slightest condescension. To those who doubted, he listened with care and explained with gentle reasoning. Some said his wisdom was like an unfathomable ocean, yet his gentleness was like a cool stream, refreshing all who came near. Above all, Sariputta demonstrated boundless reverence for the Buddha. Though his understanding was unmatched, he never once placed himself alongside his master. Instead, he bowed low, always regarding himself as a humble student, eager to listen. On one occasion, when some followers praised him as one who understood the Dharma almost as clearly as the Buddha himself, Sariputta only smiled and said, "Even the moon's brilliance is only a reflection of the sun. Whatever I have, it is not mine. It all comes from the teacher." This gentle humility made Sariputta not only a revered master, but also a beloved companion. He never boasted of his knowledge or claimed credit. When he noticed a young monk misinterpreting the teaching, he would not rebuke them publicly. Instead, he would quietly guide them in private, so that they learned while preserving their dignity. Such thoughtfulness, such softness of heart, was itself a sign of true wisdom, the kind that walks hand in hand with compassion. One of the most touching moments of his life came when Sariputta knew his time to enter Nirvana was near. He did not choose to pass away amid the grand assembly, nor to leave behind a scene of clinging grief. Instead, he quietly returned to his birthplace, where he comforted his elderly mother, who had not yet embraced the Dharma, and then departed this world in serenity. His final act, like his entire life, was marked by simplicity, humility, and completeness. In the Western world, wisdom is often tied to debate, power, or even arrogance. But Sariputta revealed the opposite. The greater the wisdom, the gentler the heart. Just as a rice stalk bows lower as it ripens, so too does true wisdom manifest in humility. Knowledge without humility is mere vanity. Wisdom joined with gentleness is a light for the world. The image of Sariputta reminds us, even in today's modern age of overwhelming information, that the essence is not to know much, to argue brilliantly, or to win debates. What matters is to use our understanding to uplift others, to create harmony, to bring peace. When learning makes a person softer, humbler, and more compassionate, that is the unmistakable sign of genuine wisdom. Though Sariputta departed more than 2 millennia ago, the legacy he left remains. A legacy of wisdom that never weighed others down, but instead nourished hearts like a flowing stream. And it is precisely through his humility that he showed us, and the absence of boasting. There are people whose greatness does not come from eloquent sermons, nor from grand achievements that posterity remembers, but from their silence, from the way they live so simply that they almost vanish within life itself. Among the disciples of the Buddha, Mahakassapa, later known widely as Kassapa, was such a figure. No tidy garments like many monks of his time, only a stark austerity. And yet, it was this very austerity that radiated a light that silenced anyone who saw him. It was not the brilliance of power, nor the glamour of scholarship, but the stillness of a heart that had fully renounced. Born into a wealthy Brahmin family, Kassapa had every condition for a comfortable life. Such a life seemed extreme. But to Kassapa, it was liberation. What set Kassapa apart was his consistency. While many ascetics treated self-mortification as a temporary means, only to later return to more comfortable lives when opportunity allowed, Kassapa remained steadfast in his radical simplicity. He never flaunted his austerity, nor used it as proof of achievement. On the contrary, he avoided praise, disliked standing before crowds, and cared nothing for titles. The world may have called him foremost in ascetic practice, but to him, it was merely a means to guard the mind against arrogance. Kassapa's story is also a profound lesson in true humility. Humility is not merely polite words or modest gestures, but a state of being where one no longer feels the need to prove oneself, to be recognized, or to assert the ego's presence. Kassapa embodied that spirit. He let his life speak for itself. In Buddhist tradition, Kassapa was entrusted with the Buddha's robe and bowl, the symbols of the Dharma. This was deeply symbolic. The Buddha did not transmit the lineage to the most eloquent speaker. For true value does not lie in words or appearances, but in the way one lives, and Kassapa lived as a living testimony to selflessness. From a modern perspective, Kassapa's story raises a pressing question. In a noisy world where everyone seeks attention on social media, where people judge one another by appearances, fame, and displays of wealth, can we learn something from Kassapa about simplicity and silence? Do we have the courage to live truthfully, even if it makes us invisible to society? Perhaps Kassapa did not leave behind many dazzling sermons, but he left behind a message that will never fade. Simplicity is not poverty. It is the greatest freedom. 5.4. Humility spreading through the Sangha, the silent, yet everlasting exemplars. In the early history of Buddhism, people often focused on prominent disciples such as Ananda, Sariputta, or Mahakassapa. Yet if we only look at these figures, we risk overlooking an essential piece. The countless monks and nuns who lived quietly in the background of the Sangha, contributing through humility, performing small but sincere acts that sustain the Dharma. They are living proof of the equality and selflessness that the Buddha taught. Reading the ancient scriptures, we find disciples who never delivered grand sermons, never debated with outsiders, and were not celebrated as foremost in any field. Yet they were known through very ordinary stories. A gentle smile, a gesture of sharing food, quietly caring for a sick fellow practitioner. These seemingly minor acts might appear insignificant at first glance, but they were what made the Sangha complete. Once, a young monk came to request a robe from an elder because his own had worn out. The elder, who already lived minimally, had only 2 robes left. Without hesitation, he handed one to the young monk and wrapped himself in a patched cloth. When asked why, he simply smiled. The young need it more than I do. What I keep for myself is only external anyway. These nameless acts preserve the spirit of non-attachment and selflessness in daily life. The Sangha also had nuns who were shining examples of humility. One story tells of a nun named Patachara, who had endured the grief of losing her entire family, yet after ordaining, lived simply and patiently. She never sought the best portion for herself, nor did she crave recognition. When praised, she would say, Let all praise be for the teacher. The most intelligent disciples would bow to listen to the less educated. This allowed the Sangha to become fertile ground where anyone could sow the seeds of liberation. Importantly, humility in the Sangha was not just reflected in words or outward actions, but stemmed from a profound understanding of non-self. Many monks realized that all merit and accomplishments were not for feeding the ego, but for the benefit of all beings. Therefore, they avoided speaking of their own deeds and often redirected praise toward the community and the Buddha. In assemblies, if someone praised an individual, that person would subtly transfer the acknowledgement to fellow disciples, as if they had contributed nothing themselves. These exemplars, though not as prominent as Ananda or Sariputta, enabled the Dharma to spread across Asia and eventually to the West over millennia. They were humble bricks, forming the sturdy foundation of Buddhism. Without them, history would be a collection of isolated legends. With them, we see a vibrant, sincere community life. In today's world, where individuals are constantly urged to prove themselves and make a personal mark to be recognized, these humble examples from the Sangha remind us that true value does not lie in being named, but in quiet contribution. Not everyone needs to be the spotlight. Often, it is the shadows behind the scenes that make the light shine brighter. Looking back, we see that the Buddha left not just a few extraordinary individuals, but an entire community of ordinary, humble people who supported each other. They did not compete for position or assert the ego through words, but expressed it through daily acts of kindness. This is the silent strength that allowed the Sangha to endure for over 2,000 years. These stories, though not dramatic, contain a profound message. Humility does not diminish our value. In today's world, people are constantly told to be more confident, be stronger, assert yourself. We are surrounded by countless lessons on personal branding, standing out, and making sure we are not left behind in a fiercely competitive society. But have you ever asked yourself, what happens when the ego grows too big? When pride becomes a burden, and the need to prove ourselves turns into loneliness, pressure, and even suffering? There is an unspoken truth. Many of life's tragedies do not come from enemies outside, but from the ego within. If we dare to ask the opposite question, can we be happier if we loosen our grip on the self? Could humility and non-self be the doorway to a deeper, more enduring strength? Then we step into a very different journey, one that the Buddha and great sages of the past have left for humanity. Humility is often misunderstood as weakness, and non-self as losing one's identity. In truth, humility is the very strength that allows us to connect, to learn, to grow. And non-self is the path that frees us from the chains of attachment, opening the way to an inner freedom no power, wealth, or fame could ever grant. The real question is, do we dare to believe that this strength already lies hidden within us, waiting to be awakened? In this script, we will explore the foundational Buddhist teaching of non-self, inspiring stories of humility from the Buddha and his great disciples, and most importantly, how these lessons can be directly applied to your relationships, your work, and your inner life. This is not only a journey of philosophy, but also a mirror to reflect upon yourself. In teams, easy to fracture. In families, ego creates conflict between spouses, distance between parents and children. In friendships, ego turns bonds fragile, ready to break over the smallest disagreements. Modern society glorifies the image of the individual hero, those who stand out from the crowd. We hear slogans like, "Be different," and delusions of power. The more society worships the ego, the more people become obsessed with protecting their self-image, rather than opening their hearts to genuine connection. As a result, while the